Greetings, hello, Dumelang, Abshenin, Macheroni, Siyanbingelela, abantu be Nubian Exodus, sithemba ukuthi niyeba naba nesikhathi esikahle. And just we want also to pass our word of thanks for ukuthi niloko nicheck umsebenzi esiwenzayo. Namhlanje we have come here to deliver another video on a topic that I think it is talked about, though people are not pretty much aware of what they are saying. And it is the fact that since the 1600s coming to 2025, South Africa has experienced the work of missionaries from the West. It was big in the 19th century, and that was the time of colonialism. That was the era of serious colonialism. So namhlanje, what we want to talk about is the fact that looking at that missionary project, we then have to come to the admission that the whole missionary project in South Africa or in Southern Africa or in Africa was a complete failure. The whole missionary project in South Africa, in Southern Africa, in Africa was a complete failure. So I'm not going to be looking at the whole African continent, even though there's so much that one can say about that. I will just be looking at South Africa and probably will touch a bit on Southern Africa, especially Zimbabwe, on why do I think the whole missionary project was a complete failure. Now, there are seven reasons why I think so. 7 reasons why I think the whole missionary project in South Africa was a complete failure. First of all, the first reason is that the missionary project created within our culture the attitude of demonization and the degradation of the natives. If one can read the prayer of Jan van Riebeeck when he landed in the Cape, where he spoke of our ancestors as savages, as people who are in darkness and all of that, and you look at the type of people who are saying those things. These were the very same people who were also in darkness. These were the very same people who went on to commit genocidal acts. These were the very same people who lived as if they were barbarians, but because they were born in so-called Christian communities, they tended to think that they themselves were Christians, and therefore someone who was not within that community was then taken as a savage and as a barbarian. So, this idea of demonizing and degrading natives was embedded in the missionary project, and this was the idea that gave birth to the inferiority complexes, the feelings of self-hatred, the lack of self-worth among the natives of South Africa. This was a deliberate creation of the missionaries through their demonization and degradation of the native life, via the process of othering, treating the natives as the other, and then painting him badly, and then those attitude and those way of thinking were then later on established within the culture. And as time went on, the natives began to believe himself or herself to be that type of a person. This is why you had the people that we now know as the Griqua people. back then there was this idea where they called themselves bastards, because the white colonialists who raped their mothers and had children with some of the slaves, they called those children bastards. And then when those children grew up, they ended up calling themselves bastards because of those things. So the first reason why I think the Missionary Project was a complete failure is the fact that it was responsible for the demonization and degrading of native life. Secondly, the Missionary Project was responsible for the undermining of native leadership. The Missionary Project was responsible for the undermining of native leadership. We do see, if you can check in the Eastern Cape in the early 19th century, there was a missionary by the name of John Eliff, a very cruel, a very divisive and immoral man who was a missionary, I think, of the London Missionary Society, if I'm not mistaken. This was a man who was responsible for creating a division between the people we so-called call Amaxhosa and the people we so-called call Amamfengu. Amamfengu were these people who ran from KZN because of the wars and the destabilizations that were happening there in what is now called, so-called Imfekani, which obviously it's still a problematic thing, but so they ran from KZN and then they came Eastern Cape. Arriving at Eastern Cape under the Xhosa king Uyinza, he gave them land, he gave them livestock, and he even gave one of his daughters to one of the leaders of these people. And then John Eliff managed to seduce Amamfengu to turn against Amaxhosa and go to the side of the British, because they were then promised Xhosa land. And Amamfengu, they did that, and then that resulted in wars between the British, the Dutch, Amamfengu versus Amaxhosa, because of this missionary John Eliff, who managed to seduce Amamfengu to fight against their own brothers. And then in the last war between the British and Amaxhosa, I think it was the war of, it was in around 1877, if I'm not mistaken, Amamfengu were betrayed by the British. The lands that they were looking for and all of that, they were not given. And then some of them in large numbers went back to the Xhosa side, and it was because of the British. And that for many, for isikhathi they undermined native leadership. Leaders who rose up and were trying to defend their land, against this colonial invasion. Amamfengu were used as mercenaries, to go and destroy those leaders. They were used as mercenaries to go and destroy native children. They were used to go and destroy native women. They were indoctrinated by these Europeans. So because of that, missionaries were also deeply involved. There was also another missionary by the name of Reverend William Boyce. I think he was of the Methodist Church. So this missionary, what this missionary did was that he had this view that missionaries are the natural advisors of the natives. It was this paternalistic thinking. They believed that the kings, the native kings, have to come to them for advice, and then these missionaries will then take these advices to the colonial masters. So any leader who refused, missionary guidance, They will demonize that leader. They will call him names, and then they will disrespect that native leader. So you then see, this undermining of native leadership by the missionaries. That's the second point. Now the third one is, the missionaries had this idiotic obsession with proselytization. They wanted to proselytize, people instead of bringing them to true saving knowledge of Christ Jesus. You do see this firstly with the people that I've just mentioned, Amamfengu. Amamfengu, only went to the side of the British and were so-called, Christians, and then they were used as mercenaries. These were the people who were used as mercenaries and people who were used to demonize native life. So these people were not truly converted, because if they were not going to be taking these missions to go kill people, but that's what they were doing. So the missionaries instead were obsessed with having someone behaving like a European. So behaving like a European was sort of like misunderstood to be Christians, and that in fact resulted in a false Christianity in South Africa. And second, another thing, the fourth point why the missionary project was also a failure was that it had this deep ignorance of native culture, something that we have talked about, I think, in the video. If you can check our videos where we deal with issues of Africanization and all of that, currently, there is that where now you have these African theologians who are trying to stand up and sort of like look at the African culture in, from a different perspective compared to how the missionaries described and interpreted it. The cause of that is the missionary ignorance of native culture. Even today, the missionaries who come from the West, the overwhelming majority of these missionaries are ignorant of the native culture, and yet they want to be teachers. That's something that is always shocking about them. And then we also see that, missionaries were just power hungry. They were just power hungry. If you can look at the first bishop of Matebele land, the first bishop of Mashona land, Bishop Dr. Knight Bruce, he was a bishop in Bloemfontein, Anglican bishop in Bloemfontein, and he was bribed by the imperialist Cecil Rhodes, a very wicked person. Probably like in South Africa, you do not have any person who has walked South Africa and who was as wicked as Cecil Rhodes. This bishop, Dr. Knight Bruce, was bribed by Cecil Rhodes to be given a position as the first bishop of Mashonaland. He was power hungry, and in Mashonaland he was busy taking land. He had huge tracts of land, being bribed by Cecil Rhodes. So these missionaries were power hungry, many of them. You can even read about your Robert Moffat, John Moffat. These were power hungry people, very power hungry. They were deeply involved with Cecil Rhodes, deeply involved with the Rothschilds, with the elites of Europe. This is what they were doing. They were just, power grabbing, power hungry people. And that gave Christianity a bad name. And then also paternalism. In South Africa, you had the Ethiopian movement, which started in the late 1800s by Reverend Nehemiah Tile, who left the mainline missionary churches because of this paternalism, where the missionaries thought that they are our fathers. We are children to them. We are children, they are our fathers. They have to teach us we have to listen to them. They have to be, our perpetual teachers. We have to be perpetual listeners. And they felt that they have to be the ones who guide us, who tells us, how to navigate the Christian life. There was that paternalism, that was deeply embedded within the missionary project. And then lastly, the missionary project did not result in any ethical or moral improvement in South African society. The missionary project did not result in any ethical or moral improvement in South Africa. We see that the more the missionary project began to be hegemonic and established in South Africa, the worse the native life became. Because now the cultural systems that sort of like prevented the natives from acting out their depravity were demonized, were shattered by missionary preaching and their recruiting of other native to continue the demonization of native ways of living. Now, the destruction of this cultural system then resulted, in the destruction of the native life's worldview. But the missionaries failed to provide the natives with something which was better, because they were more concerned with Europeanization than to bringing people to a true knowledge of Jesus Christ. So that resulted in the destruction and the eroding, of native life. We began to see prostitutions. We began to see homelessness, something that did not exist. We began to see fatherlessness within the native communities, because the missionaries working with the colonialist sort of like had this thing that the native had to go and work for them. And the missionaries truly believe that the natives have to leave whatever he's doing and come to work the European masters, and that resulted in a problem, because native families were then broken down, and then taverns began to be introduced by these people, and then the native communities were completely obliterated because of the appearance of these missionaries. So now you do see that even today, native communities are like in deep darkness. They are rotten, and that rot, if you can go back, you begin to see that it began to gain momentum when missionary doctrines began to be hegemonic and established within native communities. So the missionary project did not result in any ethical or moral improvement. Another thing that, like for example, the missionaries will come and demonize, initiation schools. They will demonize initiation schools also for girls. They will demonize those things. And those things were, to some extent, very crucial in terms of maintaining the ethical and moral principles within native communities. And therefore, by them demonizing them and then not providing something which was better than them, they left the native with nothing to hold him, to hold him and making sure that he does not fully act out his depravity. So the missionaries, because of their demonization and degrading of natives, resulted in the destruction of natives in that way. So just to summarize, the missionary project was a failure because of its demonization and degrading of native life, its undermining of native leadership, its idiotic obsession with proselytization instead of conversion, their ignorance of native culture. Many of them were very power hungry. They were working with the colonialists, sometimes acting as spies. Their paternalistic attitudes. And then lastly, the missionary project did not result in any ethical or moral improvement. I hope that you enjoy this video. If you have any comments or suggestion or critique, please post them in the comment section. Have a good day. Bye bye.